My name is Lauren Mitchell. I'm 34 years old, and 4 months ago, my parents sued me for $715,000 over a house I never agreed to pay for. They bought my younger sister, Kayla, a newly built 5-bedroom home in Plano, Texas, and somehow, without my knowledge, they put my name on the mortgage as a cosigner. I didn't find out through a conversation or even a warning. I found out when a collection notice showed up in my mailbox, stamped urgently in red ink like my life hadn't already been quietly rewritten without me. When I called my mom, my hands were shaking so badly I had to put the phone on speaker just to hold it steady. I asked her one simple question. Why is my name on a mortgage I've never seen? There was a pause on the other end, just long enough for my stomach to drop before she said something I don't think I'll ever forget. We figured you wouldn't mind helping your sister. If this story already sounds unbelievable, you're not alone. Before I take you back to how all of this started, take a second to subscribe to Women Reddit Stories if you connect with stories like this. And I'm genuinely curious, where are you watching from, and what time is it there right now? Drop it in the comments. Now let me take you back, because none of this happened overnight. It started long before the house, long before the lawsuit, back when I was just one of 2 daughters in a family where the rules were never applied equally. Growing up in our home in Columbus, Ohio, there were always 2 very different versions of what it meant to be a daughter. Kayla was the easy one. She had this effortless charm, the kind that made teachers smile a little wider when she spoke and neighbors stopped to chat just a little longer when she walked by. She laughed at my dad's jokes like they were actually funny, helped my mom cook dinner without being asked, and somehow made every family gathering revolve around her without ever looking like she was trying. And then there was me. It wasn't difficult, not really. I was just different. I liked structure. I liked plans. While Kayla thrived in conversations, I thrived in spreadsheets. Numbers made sense in a way people didn't. If I worked hard enough, I could control the outcome. At least, that's what I believed back then. When I graduated from Ohio State with a degree in finance, I did it with honors and a job already lined up at a mid-sized firm in Chicago. I remember calling home that day, expecting at least a little excitement, maybe even pride. My dad's response came after a long pause. That's great, Lauren. But have you thought about settling down like your sister? Kayla had gotten engaged at 23, married by 24, and by 29 she already had 2 kids and a house my parents helped furnish down to the last detail. When she needed help, they were there. When she wanted something, they found a way to make it happen. When I needed help, the expectation was simple, I'd figure it out. And I did. I paid off my student loans on my own. I worked late, took on extra clients, built a career that didn't rely on anyone else stepping in to save me. I told myself that independence was something to be proud of, even when it came at the cost of feeling like I didn't quite belong in my own family. Every holiday followed the same script. Kayla would walk in with her kids, my parents lighting up the second they saw her. My mom would rush over, take one of the kids from her arms, already asking what she needed, what she wanted, how they could help. Then she'd turn to me with that same look I'd known my entire life, the one that wasn't unkind, just quietly disappointed. You could learn a lot from your sister, she'd say, like I was still a work in progress she hadn't given up on yet. I stopped expecting anything different a long time ago. The first time they asked me for money, it was small enough that I almost didn't think twice about it. Kayla called me one afternoon, her voice light but careful, like she'd rehearsed what she was about to say. Hey, Lauren. I hate to ask, but we're a little tight right now. Derek's hours got cut, and we need about $12,000 to cover some expenses. Just until things stabilize. I remember sitting at my desk, staring at my computer screen while she talked, already knowing how this would play out. What about the last time? I asked quietly. There was a pause, shorter this time. We'll figure that out too. I promise. That was the problem. They always promised. And somehow, I was always the one expected to believe them. I can't, I said finally. Not this time. She didn't argue. She didn't get angry. She just said, okay, in that soft, disappointed tone that somehow made me feel worse than if she'd yelled. An hour later, my mom called. I don't understand how you can be so cold to your own sister, she said, her voice already thick with emotion. I'm not being cold, I replied, trying to keep my tone steady. I'm being realistic. Family isn't about being realistic, Lauren. It's about showing up when people need you. That sentence stayed with me longer than I expected. Because in our family, showing up has always meant one thing: giving, without question, without limits, without asking what it might cost you. Over the next 2 years, the requests didn't stop. They just changed shape. It wasn't always money. Sometimes it was co-signing a lease because Kayla's credit wasn't strong enough. Sometimes it was covering a bill that had slipped through the cracks. Every time, the expectation was the same. And every time I said no, the reaction followed a familiar pattern. Silence from my dad. Disappointment from my mom. And subtle, carefully crafted posts from Kayla on social media about how family should always come first. By the time I created a folder in my email labeled Family Requests, I wasn't doing it out of spite. I was doing it because I needed to remind myself that I wasn't imagining things. That the pattern was real. That I wasn't the selfish one for setting boundaries. I just didn't realize yet how important that folder would become. The envelope that changed everything looked like every other piece of mail I'd received that week. Plain white, standard print, nothing about it standing out except for the word "Final Notice" stamped across the front. I almost tossed it aside with the rest. But something made me open it. And the moment I read the first line, I felt the ground shift under me in a way I can't fully describe. Mortgage account delinquent. Property address, 2718, Brookstone Drive, Plano, Texas. Outstanding balance, $715,000. Cosigner, Lauren A. Mitchell. I read it 3 times before it. The woman who answered the phone sounded calm, professional, completely unaware that she was about to explain something that would split my life into a before and an after. Thank you for calling First National Lending, this is Rebecca speaking. How can I assist you today? I swallowed, trying to steady my voice. Hi. I received a notice about a mortgage account that I'm apparently a cosigner on. There has to be some kind of mistake. Of course, I can take a look at that for you. Can you verify your full name and date of birth? I gave her the information, my fingers gripping the edge of the kitchen counter so tightly they were starting to ache. There was a pause as she typed. Then, yes, Miss Mitchell, I do see the account here. You are listed as a cosigner on the mortgage for the property in Plano, Texas. The loan originated approximately 16 months ago. 16 months. My mind stalled on that number. Over a year had passed, and I had never heard a single word about it. There's no way, I said, shaking my head even though she couldn't see me. I never signed anything. I've never even been to that property. I understand your concern, she replied, her tone still even, still detached. However, we do have a signed and notarized mortgage agreement on file with your name. Notarized. The word hit differently. It meant someone hadn't just scribbled my name on a piece of paper. It meant someone had made it official. Can you send me a copy of whatever you have? I asked, my voice quieter now, tighter. Absolutely. I can have the full loan package emailed to you within 24 hours. Thank you. I hung up before she could say anything else. Then I just stood there in my kitchen, the letter still in my hand, the silence pressing in around me like it was waiting for me to react. A cosigner. On a $715,000 mortgage. Attached to my name like it had always been there. I moved slowly, almost mechanically, grabbing my laptop and opening my credit report. I didn't want to see it, but I needed to. And there it was. The account had been sitting there for over a year, quietly growing, quietly tying my financial future to something I had never agreed to. Late payments had already started stacking up. My credit score had dropped nearly 90 points, damage that hadn't made sense until now. I stared at the screen, trying to process the scale of it. This wasn't just a misunderstanding. This was something deliberate. Something planned. And there was only one place it could have come from. I picked up my phone again and called my mother. She answered on the second ring, cheerful, like she always was when nothing was wrong, at least, nothing that affected her. "Lauren. I was just thinking about you." I didn't respond to that. "Why is my name on a mortgage in Texas?" I asked. Silence. Not confusion. Not surprising. Just silence. It lasted maybe 3 seconds, but it was long enough for everything inside me to start falling into place. "We were going to talk to you about that," she said finally, her voice softer now, careful. "Talk to me about what?" I asked. "The part where you used my name without asking? Or the part where you let it go on for over a year without telling me?" I heard movement on the other end, the faint sound of a chair scraping against the floor. Then my dad's voice came through, firm, already defensive. "Lauren, you need to calm down." "I am calm," I said, though my hands were shaking again. "Explain it to me." "It's simple," he said. "Your sister needed a stable home for the kids. This was the best option." "And that has what to do with me?" "You have good credit. A strong income. It made the process easier." Easier. The word felt almost absurd in the context of what he was describing. "You put me on a $715,000 mortgage without my permission," I said slowly. "That's not making something easier. That's fraud." "It's not fraud," he snapped. "It's family." I closed my eyes for a second, trying to keep my voice from breaking. "You forged my signature." "We handled the paperwork," he said, brushing it off like the details didn't matter. "Everything was done properly." "Properly?" I repeated. "I never signed anything." My mom's voice cut in then, softer, emotional in a way that felt practiced. "Lauren, sweetheart, we didn't think you'd make such a big deal out of this. It's just until things settle down." Kayla needed help. "She always needs help," I said. "That's not fair," my mom replied quickly. "She has a family. Responsibilities." "And I don't?" I asked. "Or do mine just not count because they don't look the same?" "That's not what we're saying," she said, but there was hesitation there now, a crack in the certainty. "What exactly are you saying then?" I pressed. My dad answered again, his tone shifting into something colder. "We're saying you're in a position to help, and this is what family does. We've done a lot for you over the years." I almost laughed at that, but there was nothing funny about it. "I paid for my own college," I said. "I paid off my own loans. I built my career without asking you for anything. Meanwhile, you've been supporting Kayla for years." "That's different," he said. "How?" I asked. There was a pause, and then he said the quiet part out loud. "She needs it more." The words landed heavier than anything else they'd said. Not because I didn't already know that was how they saw it. But because this time, they weren't even pretending otherwise. "And what happens when she can't make the payments?" I asked, my voice steady again now, sharper. "Because according to the letter I just got, that's already happening." Another pause. Then my mom said, "We're working on it." That's not an answer. "We'll figure it out," she insisted. "We always do." I let out a slow breath. No. They always didn't. They just expected someone else to. And this time, that someone was me. "You need to start making the payments," my dad said, like we were discussing something routine, something already decided. "At least until Kayla gets back on her feet." I felt something shift inside me then. Not a shock. Not confusion. Something quieter. Colder. No, I said. The word sat there between us, heavier than anything else in the conversation. No, he repeated, like he hadn't heard me correctly. No, I said again, more firmly this time. I'm not paying for a house I never agreed to. My mom's breath hitched. Lauren, please don't do this. I'm not doing anything, I replied. You already did it. This is your family, she said, her voice breaking now. How can you be so heartless? There it was. The shift. The moment where I stopped being the daughter and started being the problem. I'm not the one who committed fraud, I said quietly. Don't use that word, my dad snapped. It's the correct word. It's not a crime when it's family, he said. That sentence hung in the air for a second, and I realized something then that I don't think I had fully understood before. They didn't think they had done anything wrong. Not really. They thought they had done something necessary. Something justified. Because in their minds, I wasn't being taken advantage of. I was being used the way I was always meant to be. As the one who would fix things. Then you need to rethink what family means, I said. And before they could respond, before my mom could cry or my dad could argue, I hung up. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I sat at my kitchen table with my laptop open, running through every possible outcome like it was a problem I could solve if I just found the right formula. If I did nothing, my credit would collapse. If the loan defaulted, I could be held legally responsible. My career, everything I had built, could be affected. This wasn't just about money. This was about control. About identity. About someone deciding they had the right to sign my name on something that could follow me for decades. Around 1:30 in the morning, I stopped trying to figure it out on my own. And I called the one person I knew who wouldn't sugarcoat any of it. Ethan Brooks. We'd gone to college together at Ohio State. Study partners during finals, the kind of friendship built on late nights and shared stress. While I went into finance, he'd gone into law. Real estate law, specifically. He answered on the third ring, his voice thick with sleep. Lauren? Do you know what time it is? I do, I said. And I'm sorry. But I need your help. That got his attention. What's going on? I told him everything. The letter. The mortgage. The phone call. The silence on the other end when I asked my mom why. When I finished, there was a long pause. Then he said, very clearly, if what you're telling me is accurate, this is identity fraud. And it's serious. I didn't sign anything, I said. Then someone did it for you, he replied. And if there's a notarized document involved, that opens up an entirely different level of legal exposure. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the ceiling. What do I do? First, he said, his voice sharper now, fully awake, you get copies of every single document tied to that loan. Application, signatures, notarization records. Everything. Okay. Second, you start gathering anything that proves you never agreed to this. Emails, messages, anything in writing. I thought about the folder. The one I'd created years ago. I have something, I said slowly. An email from Kayla asking me to co-sign a lease. I told her no. Clearly. In writing. Good, he said immediately. That's exactly the kind of thing we need. We. The word settled something in me I didn't realize had been off balance. For what? I asked. For what's coming next, he said. And what's that? There was a brief pause before he answered. A fight. And for the first time since I opened that letter, I realized this wasn't going to stay inside the family. This was going to end somewhere else. Somewhere public. Somewhere final. Ethan didn't waste time. By the next morning, he had already sent me a list, organized, methodical, exactly the way my brain needed it to be. Documents to request, accounts to check, agencies to notify. It wasn't just advice, it was a strategy. And for the first time since everything started, I felt like I wasn't reacting anymore. I was preparing. The loan documents arrived in my email later that afternoon. I didn't open them right away. I sat at my kitchen table for a full minute, staring at the subject line like it might somehow change if I gave it enough time. Because once I opened that file, whatever was inside would stop being theoretical. It would become real in a way I couldn't undo. Finally, I clicked. The mortgage application was longer than I expected, 13 pages, detailed, formal, filled with legal language designed to make everything feel official and unquestionable. My name appeared throughout the document, printed neatly where it belonged. And then I reached the signature pages. There it was. Lauren A. Mitchell. Written in ink. At first glance, it looked close enough. Close enough that someone who didn't know me might not think twice about it. But I knew my signature the way you know your own handwriting without thinking. It wasn't something I had to analyze, it was something I recognized instantly. The L was wrong. I looped mine upward at the end, a habit I picked up years ago during a rushed signing season at work. The one on the document curved down instead, slower, more deliberate. The spacing between my first and last name was tighter than usual. The pressure marks were inconsistent, like someone had tried to mimic the motion without understanding the rhythm behind it. It wasn't mine. Not even close. I leaned closer to the screen, studying it like I could somehow force it to make sense. Someone had practiced that. That realization landed heavier than anything else so far. This hadn't been a quick decision or a careless mistake. Someone had taken the time to copy my name, to try to make it look real. I scrolled further. Notary section. September 18, 2023. Location, Collin County, Texas. I frowned, my mind already starting to piece something together. I opened my calendar and pulled up that week. September 16th through the 20th. Chicago. Quarter-end audit. I had been in the office late every night that week, barely leaving except to sleep. I remembered it clearly because it had been one of the most demanding projects of the year. There was no way I had been in Texas. No way I had signed anything in person. I checked my email archive, searching for anything that might confirm it. Within seconds, I found it, meeting confirmations, internal messages, timestamped reports. Evidence of exactly where I had been. Then I opened my phone and scrolled through my photos. And there it was. A picture my coworker Jenna had taken during a late-night coffee run, the city lights behind us, both of us looking exhausted but still smiling. The timestamp read September 18, 10:42 p.m. Chicago. Not Texas. I felt something settle into place. This wasn't just suspicion anymore. This was proof. I forwarded everything to Ethan immediately, the loan documents, the signature pages, the screenshots of my calendar, the photo. He called me less than 5 minutes later. "This is exactly what we needed," he said, his voice sharp, focused. "You weren't even in the same state. That alone undermines the entire notarization." "What does that mean?" I asked. "It means whoever notarized this either didn't verify your identity, or knowingly signed off on a false document. Either way, it's a serious violation." I leaned back in my chair, staring at the ceiling again, the same way I had the night before. "So what happens now?" "Now we stop playing defense," he said. "We go on offense." The shift in language wasn't subtle. Up until that point, everything had felt like damage control. Trying to contain something that had already gone wrong. But this was different. This was action. "What do you need from me?" I asked. "Everything," he replied. "Any communication you've had with your family about money, co-signing, anything like that. I want a clear pattern. A history that shows you consistently said no. I opened the folder. The one I had labeled family requests. At the time, creating it had felt almost excessive, like I was documenting something that didn't need to be documented. But now, as I scrolled through the emails, the messages, the timestamps, it felt like I had unknowingly been preparing for this moment all along. There was the email from Kayla asking me to co-sign her apartment lease. My response was clear. I'm not comfortable co-signing anything. I won't be able to do that. There was another message about a loan she had asked for. Another refusal. Another explanation. Each one is polite. Each one firm. Each one is undeniable. I sent everything to Ethan. This is good, he said after a few minutes of reviewing. This shows a pattern. You've consistently refused to take on financial responsibility for her. That makes their claim, if they try to argue you agreed, much weaker. If? I asked. There was a brief pause. Lauren, he said carefully, based on what you've told me about your parents, I wouldn't be surprised if they try to push this legally. The idea settled in slowly. Not because it was shocking. But because it made a certain kind of sense. They think I'll give in, I said. Exactly, he replied. They're counting on pressure. Emotional, financial, whatever works. I looked down at the mortgage document still open on my laptop. My name. On something I had never agreed to. They're not getting it, I said quietly. I didn't think they would, he said. But we need to be ready for what comes next. 2 weeks later, I drove to Columbus for Thanksgiving. Not because I wanted to. But because I needed to see them face to face. The house looked exactly the same as it always had. Same front porch, same faded shutters, same sense of familiarity that used to feel comforting and now just felt distant. The driveway was full. More cars than usual. My stomach tightened as I parked. Inside, the smell of food hit me first, turkey, stuffing, something sweet baking in the oven. It should have felt normal. It should have felt like every other holiday. It didn't. The dining room was already full when I walked in. My parents. Kayla. Her husband, Derek. My Aunt Susan. Uncle Mark. 2 cousins I hadn't seen in months. Everyone was already seated, already waiting. This wasn't a family dinner. This was a setup. Kayla stood when she saw me, her arms crossed, her expression tight. Glad you could make it. I didn't respond to that. Lauren, sit down, my dad said, gesturing to the only empty chair at the table. I stayed where I was. I'm not here to eat, I said. I'm here to talk. A ripple of tension moved through the room. My mom's eyes were already glossy, like she had prepared herself for this moment. This doesn't have to be a fight, she said softly. It already is, I replied. Kayla exhaled sharply. You're really going to do this? In front of everyone? You mean talk about the mortgage you put me on without asking? I said. Yeah. I am. Murmurs spread around the table. My aunt leaned toward my mom, whispering something I couldn't quite hear, but I could guess the tone. Disapproval. My dad's expression hardened. We're not doing this like this. Then how are we doing it? I asked. Because from where I'm standing, you already made the decision without me. Kayla's voice cut in, sharper now. You said you would help. I turned to her. When? I asked. She hesitated, just for a second. Last Christmas, she said. We were talking about the house, and you nodded. You said you'd think about it. I said I'd think about it, I repeated. That's not an agreement. It is in this family, she snapped. I almost laughed, but there was nothing funny about it. Then this family has a very loose definition of consent, I said. The room went quiet. Not the comfortable kind. The kind that comes right before something breaks. My dad pushed his chair back, the legs scraping loudly against the floor. Enough, he said. We're not going to sit here and argue semantics. It's not semantics, I replied. It's my name. My credit. My future. And it's your family, my mom said, her voice trembling now. Why can't you just help? Because I didn't agree to this, I said. And you don't get to decide for me. My aunt spoke up then, her tone sharp. You've always been like this, Lauren. Keeping score. Making everything transactional. I turned to her slowly. No. I've been keeping track. There's a difference. Kayla stood up now, her chair sliding back. You're really going to let us lose this house over a technicality? I met her eyes. This isn't a technicality, I said. It's fraud. The word landed hard. My dad's jaw tightened. Stop saying that. It doesn't stop being true just because you don't like it, I replied. The tension in the room thickened, pressing in from all sides. And then my dad said something that made everything shift. You have until December 20th, he said. I frowned. For what? To decide if you're going to start making payments, he continued. If you don't, we'll handle it another way. Something in his tone made my chest tighten. What does that mean? I asked. He didn't hesitate. It means we'll take you to court. The words settled into the room like something heavy and irreversible. No one spoke. No one moved. Because at that moment, it stopped. No one spoke for a few seconds after that. It wasn't the kind of silence that feels empty. It was the kind that feels full, like the room itself was trying to process what had just been said and didn't quite know where to put it. The air felt heavier, thicker, like breathing required just a little more effort than it should have. My parents were still standing at the table, my mom clutching the edge of her chair like it was the only thing keeping her steady. My dad's expression hadn't changed, still set in that rigid certainty I'd seen my entire life, the look that meant he had already decided how things were going to go. You're serious, I said. It wasn't really a question. Yes, he replied. Just one word. Flat. Final. Kayla shifted beside him, arms wrapped around herself now, her earlier confidence replaced with something tighter, more defensive. Like even she hadn't expected it to go this far out loud. My aunt let out a quiet sigh, shaking her head. I don't understand how we got here. I did. We got here because for years, every time I said no, it had been treated like a suggestion instead of a boundary. And now, for the first time, I wasn't backing down. You're going to sue me, I said slowly, making sure I heard it clearly in my own voice. Over a house I never agreed to pay for. You made a commitment, my dad said. No, I replied. I didn't. Kayla stepped forward then, her voice rising just enough to cut through the tension. You said you'd help. You nodded. Everyone saw it. I nodded because I was being polite, I said. Not because I was signing a contract. That's not how it works in this family, she shot back. That's exactly the problem, I said. My mom's voice broke through, soft but urgent. Lauren, please. This doesn't have to turn into something ugly. It already is, I said again, quieter this time, but no less firm. She took a step toward me, reaching out like she always did when she wanted to soften a situation. Her hand hovered for a second before resting lightly on my arm. Sweetheart, we're just asking you to help us fix this, she said. We didn't think it would become such a big issue. I looked down at her hand, then back at her face. You put my name on a legal document without asking me, I said. That's not a small issue. Her eyes filled with tears, real or not, I couldn't tell anymore. We didn't think you'd react like this. There it was again. Not regret. Not accountability. Just disappointment that I wasn't playing the role they expected. You didn't think I'd react at all, I said. My dad's patience snapped then, his voice rising for the first time. Enough. We're not going to stand here and be accused of something criminal. It is criminal, I said, holding his gaze. Watch your tone, he warned. Or what? I asked. The question hung there, sharper than I intended, but I didn't take it back. Because for the first time, I wasn't trying to keep the peace. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he looked around the table, like he was checking that everyone was still on his side. They were. Of course they were. They'll decide that in court, he said finally. That was it. That was the line that closed whatever door had still been open. I felt something settle inside me then, not anger, not panic, just a kind of clarity that I hadn't had before. Okay, I said. The word caught them off guard. Kayla frowned. Okay? Okay, I repeated. If that's how you want to handle this, then we'll handle it in court. My mom's face crumpled slightly. Lauren. No, I said, cutting her off gently but firmly. You've already made your decision. I'm just responding to it. I turned toward the door, grabbing my coat from the back of the chair. Behind me, voices started overlapping. Don't walk away from this. You're making a mistake. This doesn't have to happen. But I didn't stop. Because for once, walking away wasn't avoidance. It was the only control I had left. I stepped outside into the cold November air, the sharp bite of it hitting my face like a reset. The noise from inside the house dulled as the door closed behind me, replaced by a quiet that felt almost unreal after everything that had just happened. I made it halfway to my car before I heard the door open again. Lauren. I turned. It wasn't my parents. It was my grandfather. He moved slowly down the porch steps, his hand gripping his cane, each step deliberate but steady. At 82, he didn't move quickly anymore, but there was nothing uncertain about him either. I'm sorry, he said as he reached me. I shook my head. You don't have anything to apologize for. He studied my face for a moment, his eyes clearer than anyone else's in that house had been. They shouldn't have done this, he said quietly. The words landed differently than everything else I'd heard that day. Because they weren't defensive. They weren't manipulative. They were just honest. You knew? I asked. I found out after the fact, he said. Tried to talk some sense into your father. He didn't want to hear it. That didn't surprise me. He never does, I said. A faint smile touched the corner of his mouth, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. No. He doesn't. We stood there for a second in the cold, the silence between us easier than anything inside the house had been. Check the notary date, he said suddenly. I frowned. What? On the mortgage documents, he clarified. Something about it didn't sit right with me. My mind immediately jumped back to the paperwork I had already started reviewing. I will, I said. He nodded, then reached out, resting his hand briefly on my shoulder. You're not wrong for standing your ground. That was the first time anyone in my family had said that. And I didn't realize how much I needed to hear it until that moment. Thank you, I said quietly. He gave a small nod, then turned back toward the house, his cane tapping softly against the pavement with each step. I watched him go for a second before getting into my car. The drive back to Chicago was silent. No music. No podcasts. Just the hum of the highway and the steady replay of everything that had just happened. By the time I got home, I wasn't second-guessing myself anymore. I was focused. The next morning, I called Ethan. They're going to sue me, I said as soon as he picked up. I figured, he replied. There was no surprise in his voice. Then we get ahead of it, he continued. We start building your case now, not after they file. I already have the documents, I said. And there's something else. My grandfather told me to check the notary date. Good instinct, he said. That's exactly where we should be looking. I opened my laptop as we spoke, pulling up the scanned mortgage file again. September 18, 2023, I read aloud. Where were you that day? He asked. In Chicago, I said immediately. Work audit. I have emails, timestamps, photos. I can prove it. There was a brief pause. Then, that's big, he said. If you weren't physically present, the notarization is invalid. And if the notarization is invalid, the entire document becomes questionable. Questionable. It was a careful word. A legal word. But I knew what it really meant. It meant cracks. It meant weakness. It meant they had built their case on something that couldn't hold. We're going to need everything that proves your location, he continued. Travel records, work logs, anything you have. I'll send it, I said. And Lauren, he added, his tone shifting slightly, more serious now, once this goes to court, it's not just going to be about the mortgage. What do you mean? They're going to try to control the narrative, he said. They'll frame this as you backing out of a promise. As you abandoning your family. You need to be ready for that. I thought about the dinner. About the way everyone had already looked at me. Like I was the problem. I am, I said. But even as I said it, I knew being ready and being unaffected were two very different things. 3 weeks later, the papers arrived. I was at work when the receptionist called me down to the front desk. There's someone here asking for you, she said. When I walked into the lobby, the man standing there was exactly what I expected. Professional. Detached. Holding a large envelope like it was just another delivery. Lauren Mitchell, he asked. Yes. You've been served. He handed me the envelope, waited just long enough to confirm I had it, then turned and walked out without another word. I stood there for a second, the weight of it settling in my hands. Then I opened it. Harold Mitchell and Diane Mitchell versus Lauren Mitchell. Filed in Franklin County Civil Court. Damages sought, $715,000 plus legal fees. I read it once. Then again. Breach of verbal agreement. Unjust enrichment. They were claiming I had agreed to help. That I had gone back on my word. That I had caused them financial harm. Kayla was listed as a primary witness. Of course she was. I folded the papers carefully, slid them back into the envelope, and stood there for a moment longer. Because this was it. This wasn't a threat anymore. It wasn't a possibility. It was real. And for the first time since this started, I understood exactly where this was going. Not back to a family dinner. Not back to a conversation. Forward. Into a courtroom. Where everything they thought they could control. The lawsuit wasn't the hardest part. What came after was. Because once the papers were filed, it stopped being private. It stopped being something contained between four walls and a dinner table argument. It became public, and with that came something I wasn't fully prepared for, the version of the story they wanted everyone else to believe. Kayla posted first. It went up on Facebook late that night, just a few hours after I had been served. Long enough for them to make sure everything was official, short enough that it felt coordinated. Some people will choose money over family every single time. I never thought I'd have to learn that lesson the hard way, especially from someone I trusted. Please keep our family in your prayers during this difficult time. No names. No details. But it didn't need them. Anyone who knew us knew exactly who she was talking about. Within minutes, the reactions started coming in. Likes. Comments. Messages of support. I'm so sorry you're going through this. Family should always come first. Praying for you and your parents. I watched it unfold in real time, My phone lighting up with notifications from people I hadn't spoken to in years. Old classmates. Distant relatives. Former neighbors. All of them reacting to a story that had been carefully edited to leave out one very important detail. The truth. My Aunt Susan commented next. Some people only care about themselves eventually. Stay strong, sweetheart. That one got over 50 likes. I stared at the screen, reading through the thread again, not because I didn't understand what was happening, but because I did. This wasn't just about the lawsuit. This was about controlling the narrative. Making sure that by the time anyone thought to ask for my side, they had already decided who I was. I drafted a response. Deleted it. Started another. Deleted that one too. Ethan had warned me about this. Don't engage, he had said. Anything you say publicly can be twisted, taken out of context, or used against you. Let them talk. The courtroom is where this gets decided. So I stayed silent. And that silence cost me more than I expected. Because while I was choosing not to speak, they were filling the space with their version of events. Friends I thought knew me didn't reach out. Co-workers avoided the topic but looked at me differently. Even people who didn't say anything had already made up their minds. It wasn't the accusations that hurt the most. It was the absence of questions. No one asked if it was true. No one asked what actually happened. They just accepted the version that had been handed to them. The version where I was the one who walked away. The one who chose money over family. Christmas came and went without a single invitation. I found out about the family gathering the same way everyone else did, through photos. Matching pajamas. A decorated tree. Kayla's kids opening presents while my parents sat behind them, smiling like nothing had changed. Like I had never existed in that picture at all. I stared at one photo longer than I should have. Not because I wanted to be there. But because it confirmed something I had been trying not to fully accept. They had already rewritten the story. And in that version, I was gone. My mom sent me a text that night. Just one sentence. You chose this. I didn't reply. Because there was nothing I could say that would matter. Instead, I spent Christmas alone in my apartment, a glass of wine on the table beside me, case files spread out across the couch. It wasn't sad in the way I thought it would be. It was quiet. Controlled. Predictable. And for the first time in a long time, I realized how much of my life had been shaped by trying to meet expectations that were never really mine. Around 10 p.m., my phone buzzed. A message from my grandfather. I'm sorry. I tried. Merry Christmas, Lauren. I read it twice. Then set my phone down and let myself sit with it. Because in a situation where everything felt like it had been stripped down to sides and choices and consequences, that message reminded me of something important. Not everyone had chosen to stand against me. Some people just didn't have the power to stand up. The weeks that followed were consumed by preparation. Depositions. Document reviews. Strategy meetings with Ethan. Every piece of evidence we gathered made the situation clearer. Stronger. More undeniable. But it also made something else clear. They weren't backing down. If anything, they were doubling down. Their legal argument was simple. Too simple. They claimed I had made a verbal agreement to help with the mortgage. That my nod at a Christmas dinner constituted consent. That my refusal to pay now was a breach of that agreement. They avoided the documents entirely. Avoided the signature. Avoided the notarization. Because they knew that's where their case fell apart. They're building this on testimony, Ethan explained during one of our meetings. On interpretation. On emotion. Because they can't defend the paperwork. And that works? I asked. Sometimes, he said. If there's nothing to counter it. I looked down at the stack of documents in front of me. The emails. The timestamps. The proof of where I was when that mortgage was signed. They have a story, I said. And we have evidence, he replied. There was a difference. And in a courtroom, that difference mattered. The night before the hearing, I barely slept. Not because I was afraid of losing, but because I knew what I was about to walk into. A room where my own family would sit across from me and try to convince a judge that I owed them something I had never agreed to give. That I had failed them. That I had broken something. And I would have to sit there and listen to it. Without reacting. Without interrupting. Just waiting for the moment when the truth would finally have a chance to speak. The morning of the hearing, I got dressed slowly. Charcoal suit. Simple blouse. Minimal makeup. Everything about it intentional. Not for them. Not even for the judge. For me. Because if I was going to stand in that room, I was going to do it on my terms. Ethan met me outside the courthouse. He looked exactly like he always did, calm, composed, like he had already run through every possible outcome and knew exactly where we stood. "How are you feeling?" he asked. I thought about it for a second. "Ready," I said. And for the first time since this started, that wasn't something I was trying to convince myself of. It was true. We walked inside together, the sound of our footsteps echoing against the marble floors. The courtroom was smaller than I expected. Intimate. Contained. Like there was nowhere for anything to hide. We took our seats at the defense table. And then, a few minutes later, they walked in. My parents. Kayla. Her husband. And behind them, a few familiar faces from the family. They didn't look at me. Not once. Like eye contact would somehow make this real in a way they weren't ready to accept. Ethan leaned slightly toward me. "Remember," he said quietly, "you don't have to prove who you are. The evidence will do that for you." I nodded. The bailiff called the room to order. Everyone. The Honorable Judge Daniel Reeves took his seat with the kind of quiet authority that didn't need to announce itself. Late 50s, composed, eyes sharp behind thin-framed glasses, he looked like someone who had heard every kind of story people could bring into a courtroom, and learned to separate what felt true from what could actually be proven. "Be seated," he said. Chairs moved in unison, the sound echoing briefly before the room settled again. I kept my hands folded in front of me, steady, controlled. Across the room, my parents sat rigidly beside their attorney, Kayla just slightly behind them, her posture tight, her expression carefully arranged into something that looked like quiet distress. Their lawyer stood first. Michael Carter. Mid-60s, expensive suit, the kind of voice that carried easily without needing to be raised. He walked forward with practiced confidence, pausing just enough to establish control of the room before he spoke. "Your Honor, this is a case about trust," he began. "About a daughter who made a commitment to her family and then chose to abandon that commitment when it became inconvenient." I felt the words land, not because they surprised me, but because of how deliberately they were framed. Not facts. Not documents. A story. He continued, pacing slowly. "We will show that Ms. Mitchell agreed, verbally, to assist her parents in securing a home for her sister and her children. That agreement was witnessed. It was understood. And now, when the responsibility has come due, she is attempting to walk away from it." He stepped back, giving a slight nod. And just like that, they had painted the picture. I was the one who broke something. I was the one who changed. Carter called his first witness. Kayla. She stood slowly, smoothing her hands over her dress before walking to the stand. Her movements were controlled, careful, like she had rehearsed them. "State your name for the record," Carter said. "Kayla Mitchell," she replied, her voice soft. "Miss Mitchell, can you tell the court about the conversation that took place at your parents' home during Christmas, 2022? She nodded, her eyes already glistening. We were all talking about how expensive houses had gotten. My parents said they wanted to help me get something stable for my kids. And Lauren, she paused, just enough to gather herself, she said she would think about helping. And then she nodded. And what did that nod mean to you? Carter asked. That she agreed, Kayla said. That she was going to help us. I watched her as she spoke. Not the words. The delivery. The pauses. The way her voice dipped at just the right moments. It was convincing. If you didn't know the full story. Carter nodded, satisfied. And based on that understanding, your family moved forward with purchasing the home? Yes. No further questions. Ethan stood. He didn't rush. Didn't interrupt the rhythm that had just been set. He simply walked forward, calm, measured. Miss Mitchell, he said, his tone even, you testified that my client said she would think about helping, correct? Yes. And that she nodded? Yes. He paused briefly. Is it your understanding that thinking about something is the same as agreeing to it? Kayla hesitated. Just for a second. In our family, yes, she said. Ethan nodded slightly, like he expected that answer. In your family, he repeated. Not in a legal sense. Carter shifted in his seat. Kayla didn't respond. Ethan continued. At any point, did Lauren Mitchell sign a document in your presence agreeing to co-sign your mortgage? No, she said. Did you ever receive written confirmation from her stating she agreed to take on that financial responsibility? No. So your entire understanding is based on a conversation and a nod? Yes. Ethan gave a small nod of his own. No further questions. It was subtle. But the shift was there. Small cracks in the story. Not enough to break it. But enough to weaken it. My dad testified next. His tone was different. Less emotional. More rigid. I raised my daughter to stand by her family, he said. I never thought she'd turn her back on us like this. Carter guided him carefully, reinforcing the same narrative. Commitment. Expectation. Betrayal. Not once did he mention the mortgage documents. Not once did he bring up the signature. Because they couldn't. When it was Ethan's turn again, he didn't go to the witness stand. He went straight to the evidence table. Your Honor, he said, before we proceed further, I'd like to introduce Exhibit A. The courtroom shifted slightly. Papers moved. Attention sharpened. The mortgage application for the property located at 2718 Brookstone Drive, Plano, Texas, he continued. Listing Lauren Mitchell as cosigner. Copies were handed out. The judge adjusted his glasses, scanning the first page. Ethan waited. Let the silence do the work. Then he spoke again. Ms. Mitchell, he said, turning to me, can you please confirm for the court whether this is your signature on the document provided? I stood. Walked to where he indicated. And looked directly at the screen where my name was displayed. No, I said clearly. That is not my signature. Carter stood immediately. Objection. Overruled, Judge Reeves said without hesitation. She may answer. Ethan stepped closer to the display. Your Honor, we would also like to introduce Exhibit B, he said. Verified records showing my client's location on the date this document was allegedly signed and notarized. He handed over the files. Flight records. Work logs. Timestamped communications. The judge reviewed them carefully, his expression unreadable. Ethan continued. According to the notarization, this document was signed in person in Collin County, Texas, on September 18, 2023. However, these records place Ms. Mitchell in Chicago, Illinois, on that same date. The room went still. Not completely silent. But close enough that every small movement felt louder. Judge Reeves looked up. Mr. Brooks, he said, are you suggesting that this signature was forged? Ethan didn't hesitate. I'm stating that as fact, Your Honor. The word hung there. Fact. Not theory. Not accusation. Fact. Ethan turned back to me. Lauren, I'm going to ask you to sign your name for the court. 3 times. I nodded. Took the pen he handed me. And wrote my name. The way I always had. The way that couldn't be replicated by someone who didn't understand it. He placed the new signatures beside the one from the mortgage. Even from where I stood, the difference was obvious. The curve. The spacing. The pressure. It didn't match. It couldn't. Ethan stepped back slightly, giving the judge a clear view. No further explanation needed, he said quietly. Across the room, I heard movement. A chair shifting. A sharp inhale. Kayla's hand moving to her mouth. Because for the first time since this started, the story they had been telling didn't just have cracks. It had evidence against it. And this time, it wasn't something they could explain away. Judge Reeves leaned back slightly in his chair, his eyes moving from the documents to my parents, then to Kayla. And for the first time, something in his expression changed. Not dramatically. Not obviously. But enough. Enough to signal. Judge Reeves removed his glasses slowly, folding them in his hand as he looked down at the documents one more time before setting them aside. The courtroom was completely still now, the kind of silence that doesn't just happen, it settles, heavy and deliberate, when everyone realizes something important has just shifted. I've heard enough to understand the direction this case is going, he said. My chest tightened slightly, not from fear, but from anticipation. Because after months of being talked about, talked over, and talked around, this was the first moment where someone with authority was about to speak directly to what actually mattered. Judge Reeves looked toward my parents' table first. Mr. and Mrs. Mitchell, he said, his voice calm but firm, your claim is based on an alleged verbal agreement. A conversation at a family gathering, interpreted as a commitment to assume responsibility for a mortgage totaling $715,000. He paused, letting that number sit in the room. Even if such a conversation took place, and I am not making that determination here, a verbal understanding of that nature does not constitute a legally binding obligation of this magnitude. Carter shifted beside my parents, but he didn't interrupt. Because there was nothing to interrupt with. The judge continued, his tone sharpening slightly. However, that issue is secondary to what concerns this court far more. He picked up the mortgage document again, holding it just slightly above the desk. This document contains a signature attributed to the defendant, he said. A signature she has denied under oath. That denial is supported by comparative samples provided in court, as well as location records indicating she was not present in the state at the time of notarization. The room felt smaller somehow. More focused. Like everything had narrowed down to this one point. Which raises a very serious question, Judge Reeves continued, his gaze moving deliberately from one person to the next. How did this document come to exist? No one answered. Not my parents. Not Kayla. Not their attorney. Because there wasn't an answer that didn't make things worse. The judge set the document down carefully. This court does not enforce family expectations, he said. It enforces the law. And based on the evidence presented, there is no legal basis to compel the defendant to assume financial responsibility for this mortgage. My heart was pounding now, but I didn't move. Didn't react. Not yet. I am dismissing this case with prejudice, he said. The words landed like something solid finally hitting the ground. Final. Irreversible. Done. But he wasn't finished. Additionally, he continued, given the discrepancies in the documentation and the evidence suggesting potential misrepresentation, I am referring this matter to the district attorney's office for further review. That was the moment everything broke. Not loudly. Not dramatically. But visibly. My mom's composure collapsed first, her hand flying to her mouth as tears finally spilled over without restraint. My dad's posture, which had been rigid from the moment he walked in, seemed to fold slightly, like something inside him had given way. Kayla didn't look at anyone, she just stared straight ahead, her face pale, her expression blank in a way that felt more like shock than denial. Because this wasn't the outcome they had planned for. This wasn't the version of the story they had been telling. And now, they couldn't control it anymore. Ethan stood beside me, calm as ever, but I could feel the quiet shift in him too. The kind that comes when preparation meets reality and everything lines up exactly the way it was supposed to. Your Honor, he said, my client would like to formally proceed with her counterclaim. Judge Reeves nodded. Noted. That matter will be scheduled accordingly. Then he looked at me. Ms. Mitchell, do you have anything you'd like to say before we adjourn? I stood. Not because I had planned a speech. Not because I had something rehearsed. But because after everything that had been said about me, everything that had been assumed, this was the first time I had been asked directly. I turned slightly, just enough to look at them. My parents. Kayla. The people who had sat across from me and tried to convince a court that I owed them something I never agreed to give. I didn't choose this, I said. My voice was steady. Clear. I didn't ask to be put on a mortgage. I didn't agree to take on that responsibility. And I didn't choose to end up here. I let that sit for a second. You did. No anger. No raised voice. Just the truth. Then I sat down. The bailiff announced adjournment, and just like that, it was over. People started moving again, the quiet hum of voices returning to the room, but I stayed where I was for a moment, letting it settle. Because winning didn't feel the way I thought it would. It didn't feel like relief. It didn't feel like closure. It felt like something had ended. And something else, something quieter, had begun. Ethan placed a hand lightly on my shoulder. You did exactly what you needed to do. I nodded. I told the truth, I said. Exactly, he replied. We walked out of the courtroom together, the hallway outside brighter than it had been that morning, or maybe it just felt that way. Halfway down the corridor, I heard my name. Lauren. I didn't turn right away. When I did, it was my mom. Her face was still wet with tears, her expression a mix of something I couldn't fully read, regret, maybe, or just the realization that things hadn't gone the way she thought they would. You didn't have to do this, she said. I looked at her for a second. Then I shook my head slightly. No, I said. You didn't have to do this. There was nothing else to add. So I turned and kept walking. 2 months later, everything that had been set in motion that day started to fall into place. The bank completed its internal investigation first. The loan officer who processed the application had failed to verify identity, failed to confirm consent, and approved documents that should never have made it past initial review. He was terminated. The notary, someone my father had known for years, had his license revoked after it was confirmed he had notarized the document without my presence. My name was removed from the mortgage entirely. Every record. Every trace. As if it had never been there at all. My credit recovered within weeks. The damage undone. But not forgotten. The district attorney reviewed the case. In the end, they declined to pursue criminal charges, citing it as a first-time offense, a family matter, and lack of intent to defraud the institution itself. But civil penalties were issued. Fines. Formal warnings. A record that would follow them. My counterclaim was settled out of court. They paid my legal fees in full. $24,300. It wasn't about the money. It never was. It was about something much harder to quantify. Accountability. The house in Plano didn't last. Without my name attached to the mortgage, the financial structure they had built around it collapsed. Within months, it was sold. Kayla and Derek separated shortly after. Trust, once broken like that, doesn't repair easily. My parents downsized into a small condo outside Columbus. We don't speak. Not because I hate them, but because I finally understand that love doesn't require access. 6 months later, my life looks different. Quieter. More intentional. I was promoted at work. Senior financial analyst. Not because of what happened, but because I didn't let it break me. I started therapy. Not to fix something that was wrong with me, but to understand why I had spent so many years believing that my boundaries needed to be justified. That my no needed to be explained. It doesn't. I changed my last name. Not dramatically. Not to erase where I came from, but to remind myself that I get to choose who I am moving forward. The silence that used to feel uncomfortable now feels like peace. There are no unexpected calls. No pressure. No quiet expectations waiting for me to meet them. Just space. And for the first time, it feels like mine. Sometimes I think about the question my dad asked me that night. What do you even need that money for? I have an answer now. I need it for a life where no one gets to decide for me. Where my name belongs only to me. Where my choices don't require permission. On my shelf, there's a photo of me and my grandfather from last year. He passed a few months after the trial. On the back of the frame, in his handwriting, there's a sentence he told me the day I left that house. The strongest people are the ones who know when to walk away. I didn't walk away because I stopped loving them. I walked away because I finally started choosing myself. If this story meant something to you, if you've ever had to stand your ground when the people closest to you expected you to give in, subscribe to Women Reddit Stories.